One night, while she was fast asleep, Noor suddenly felt an unfamiliar touch. She jolted awake, only to find him standing there, looking at her with a sinister grin. Startled, she asked, "What are you doing here at this hour?" His response was a chilling laugh. "As if you don't already know why I'm here," he said, his voice heavy with menace. Noor's fear grew. She wanted to scream, but before she could make a sound, he clasped his hand over her mouth and choked her. Her thoughts raced as she struggled to understand what was happening. She recalled locking her door before going to bed. How had he managed to get in? Then it struck her. He had the automatic keys to the house. He could enter whenever he wanted. Noor fought back with all her strength, but she was no match for him. Overwhelmed and powerless, she succumbed to the realization that once again, she had been violated. He ignored her tears, her muffled cries, and the pain she endured. His inhumanity knew no bounds. When he was done, he left the room, leaving her in shambles. Noor lay there, her body trembling and tears streaming down her face. She silently cursed her fate until she eventually drifted off into a fitful sleep. From that night onward, she made it a point to lock her door every single night. Yet the fear never truly left her. Often, she would wake up in the middle of the night, convinced that someone was trying to open the door. Although the locked door provided some measure of reassurance, her fear was deeply ingrained. Even when she managed to sleep, her dreams were haunted by the same recurring nightmare, someone breaking into her room and shattering her dignity. In those dreams, she would scream and plead, but her voice would never come out. Instead, she wept silently until she woke up, her pillow soaked with tears. Each time, she realized it had been another terrifying dream, a reflection of the horrifying reality she faced. Despite everything, Noor struggled with whether she should confide in her aunt. She thought about telling her the truth, but then the expected reaction from her aunt held her back. What if her aunt blamed her? What if she was labeled the culprit instead of the victim? The fear of not being believed, especially as an orphan, kept her silent. She knew that society was quick to dismiss the voices of orphans. So Noor chose to endure in silence, her pain buried deep within her. One day, after having breakfast, Noor felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She reached out for the wall to steady herself, but darkness clouded her vision. Just as she was about to collapse, her uncle emerged from his room and grabbed her arm to prevent her fall. Noor glared at him with pure hatred before pulling herself away and retreating to her room. She shut the door, unable to bear being near him. Later, when she was supposed to head out, she reached the gate only to find that the car that normally took her had already left. Frustrated, Noor stood there, unsure of what to do. Her aunt noticed her gloomy expression and said, "Why are you so upset? Your uncle passes by your school on his way to work. He can drop you off." The mere suggestion made Noor's blood run cold. The thought of being alone in the car with him felt like a scorpion's sting. She shook her head vehemently, declining the offer. "I'll skip school today," she said hastily. Her aunt was puzzled by Noor's behavior. "You just said you have an important test. You need to go to school," she insisted. Noor didn't know what to say. Without a word, she returned to her room and changed out of her uniform. She couldn't even fathom being near her uncle, let alone going anywhere with him. The whole day passed with Noor lying in bed, feeling weak and drained. Her aunt watched her in frustration and finally said, "I've told you so many times to eat properly. You're always so frail because you never eat enough." The following day, Noor woke up earlier than usual, feeling even worse than before. Despite her weakened state, she got ready for school. She knew she couldn't miss another day. She'd already skipped her test yesterday, and if she didn't show up today, her teacher would be furious. When she arrived at school, her teachers scolded her for missing class. As punishment, they made her stand in class all day. For the first 2 periods, she endured it silently, But by the third, she felt a wave of dizziness. Suddenly, she collapsed to the floor. Her teachers and classmates rushed to her aid, but she remained unconscious. The school promptly called for the doctor, who arrived to check on her. As he examined Noor, a troubled expression spread across his face. They also contacted Noor's aunt, who hurried to the school, visibly worried. Seeing Noor in such a state made her aunt's anxiety grow. "What's wrong with her? What happened?" she asked, looking to the doctor for answers. "You should not have married off someone so young," the doctor said, causing the aunt's face to twist in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I haven't gotten her married," she replied, stunned. The doctor looked equally shocked. "Then how?" he began, but was interrupted by the aunt's urgent questioning. "What is wrong with her health, doctor? What does her condition have to do with marriage?" The doctor hesitated before saying, "Your child is pregnant." The words hit like a thunderclap. The aunt's jaw dropped, her face a mask of disbelief. At first, she couldn't process what she'd just heard. Then anger surged within her, and she lashed out at the doctor. "Shame on you! How dare you accuse such a young, orphaned girl of this? Have you no decency?" she yelled, her voice shaking with rage. But before the tirade could continue, Noor began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, and though she was awake, she felt utterly drained. The aunt helped her up and took her to the hospital for a full examination. There, her worst fears were confirmed, the same verdict as the school doctors. Noor was pregnant. Back home, the aunt's frustration boiled over. In her fury, she slapped Noor repeatedly, yelling at her and beating her as though doing so would erase the reality they now faced. Noor lay motionless, her eyes fixed on some unseen point, unable to comprehend what had happened. Speak out, she imagined her aunt taking his side, blaming her instead. And so, she bore her pain alone, growing more and more desperate with each passing day. One afternoon, feeling particularly weak and dizzy, Noor leaned against the wall for support. She felt darkness closing in and nearly fainted. Her uncle happened to be nearby and caught her arm, steadying her before she fell. Noor pulled away from him, her eyes filled with revulsion. She retreated into her room, wishing she could disappear altogether. Later that evening, her school bus had already left by the time she reached the gate. Her aunt noticed Noor's downcast expression and offered a solution. "It's no big deal," she said. "Your uncle can drop you off on his way to work. You'll get there on time." The mere thought of riding with her uncle made Noor recoil. Her immediate reaction was an emphatic, "No, I'll skip school today." Her aunt was puzzled. "But didn't you just say you had an important test? Why would you miss it now?" Noor had no answer. She returned to her room, changed out of her uniform, and spent the day in bed. Weakness weighed her down, but so did her inner turmoil. Her aunt, frustrated, scolded her. "How many times do I have to tell you to eat properly? You never eat enough." Noor remained silent, knowing her aunt couldn't understand the real cause of her frailty. By the next morning, Noor felt even worse, but she forced herself to go to school. She knew she had already missed one test and couldn't afford to miss another. When she arrived at school, however, her teachers punished her for her previous absence, making her stand for the entire day. During the third period, her vision blurred, and she collapsed in front of her classmates. A doctor was called, but when he examined Noor, his expression became troubled. The school contacted Noor's aunt, who arrived shortly afterward. The doctor's words shocked her. "You should never have married off someone so young." The aunt, baffled, responded angrily. "What nonsense are you talking about? She's just a child. Why would I marry her off?" The doctor seemed taken aback. "Then explain her condition." "She's pregnant." The aunt's mouth fell open in disbelief. She lashed out at the doctor, accusing him of lying and making baseless accusations. "Shame on you! "How dare you say such a thing about an innocent orphan?" she shouted. But as the doctor quietly confirmed his diagnosis again, the aunt's fury turned into a deep, unshakable unease. When Noor woke up, she was met with her aunt's furious, accusing gaze. Once they returned home, the aunt's shock turned into rage. She hit Noor repeatedly, demanding to know who was responsible. Noor remained silent, tears streaming down her face. The beatings continued, and the aunt's questions grew louder and more desperate. "Who did this to you? Tell me his name," she shouted. Noor's silence made the aunt even angrier. She convinced herself that Noor must be hiding something and decided to keep a closer watch on her niece. That night she stayed alert, waking at the slightest noise. When she heard faint movement, she slipped out of bed and peeked out of her room. There was Noor, walking mechanically toward the stairs, her face blank and her movements slow. The aunt followed silently, determined to find out the truth. When she reached the roof, she realized Noor wasn't meeting anyone. Instead, she was climbing the ledge, preparing to jump. The aunt lunged forward, grabbing Noor's arm just in time and pulling her back. She slapped her niece hard, shouting, "Do you know what you're doing? Suicide is a sin. One sin wasn't enough for you. Now you're trying to commit another." Noor, who had endured so much in silence, finally snapped. Tears streaming down her face, she screamed, "I didn't commit any sin. I'm not the sinner here." Her aunt froze. "If you're not guilty, then explain this. How did this happen?" Noor's voice shook with anger and pain as she replied, "Why don't you ask your husband? He's the one who can give you the real answer." With that, Noor stormed back into her room, leaving her aunt rooted in place. Her aunt stared after her, stunned by the accusation. When she finally returned to her own room, she looked at her husband, who was fast asleep. She struggled to believe Noor's words. "This man loves me," she thought. "I can't even imagine him doing something so terrible. Noor must be lying. She must be trying to shift the blame onto him to save herself." But deep down, the aunt couldn't shake the image of Noor's tear-streaked face, her trembling voice. Something wasn't right, and now a seed of doubt had been planted in her mind. She clutched her head in her hands, overwhelmed by her emotions. How could she get rid of this misery and uncover the truth? Was her niece telling the truth or not? A few days later, she took Noor back to the doctor. Desperate, she pleaded, "Please help us end this ordeal." The doctor examined Noor carefully before saying, "It's too late now. If you try anything drastic, you might endanger her life. She's very young." Hearing these words, the aunt's heart sank. No matter what Noor had done, she loved her dearly. She had raised her as if she were her own child. The thought of losing her was unbearable. When they returned home, she walked to her room, her steps heavy with sorrow. Worry clouded her mind as she tried to figure out what to do next. Noor, on the other hand, had become a shadow of her former self. She spoke little and hardly left her room. Her once lively presence was now replaced with a hollow silence. Even her aunt couldn't find solace. The neighborhood women whispered hurtful remarks whenever they saw her. "How could you not know what your niece was up to?" they asked. "We thought she was an innocent girl, but she turned out to be quite the opposite." The aunt, who had once commanded respect, was now met with sneers and accusations. She endured the humiliation quietly, but she couldn't hide her pain. She lashed out at Noor daily, demanding to know who was responsible. "Tell me his name. I'll marry you off to him and be done with it," she yelled, her patience worn thin. But Noor remained silent, her lips sealed. Her aunt grew frustrated, often slapping her in anger, but it made no difference. Noor wouldn't speak. The aunt finally decided to keep a closer watch on her, hoping she could discover the truth on her own. One night, the aunt was jolted awake by a sound outside her room. She crept out quietly, her eyes scanning the. She felt like a shattered shell, as if all strength and will had drained from her body. She hadn't confided in her aunt because she didn't want to burden her or tarnish their relationship. Her aunt had always been kind and loving. But now that same aunt was filled with scorn and disgust. Noor blamed herself, thinking she should have spoken up earlier. Maybe then things wouldn't have spiraled out of control. However, even if she did reveal the truth now, Noor knew her aunt wouldn't believe her. The timing, the circumstances, everything made her look guilty. Her aunt would assume she was lying to save herself. By evening, the news had spread throughout the school and the neighborhood. Noor's reputation, and that of her family, lay in ruins. When her uncle came home that evening, the house was unnaturally quiet. It was as if the walls themselves carried the weight of shame. He went straight to his wife's room, where she lay on the bed with her face hidden. He approached her, gently removing her arm from her face to ask what was wrong. Seeing her swollen, tear-streaked eyes shocked him. She wasn't the type to cry easily, much less to be found lying down in the middle of the day. "What happened?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. She began to speak, and as the truth tumbled out, his own legs seemed to give way. His face turned pale, the ground beneath him metaphorically vanishing. The reality hit him hard, the fear that his secret might now come to light. He swallowed hard, then asked his wife, "So what did Noor say? Who does she blame for all this?" The aunt replied bitterly, "That little wretch. What would she say? It's as if she's turned mute. She hasn't uttered a single word, like her tongue has been cut out." Hearing this, the uncle felt a small wave of relief. Noor hadn't spoken up. She'd stopped leaving her room entirely, her usual activities abandoned. She spent her days in silence, her eyes red from constant crying, as if trapped in a nightmare. The aunt was hardly better off. She was plagued by the sneering comments of neighborhood women, who would corner her and ask in biting tones, "What happened? Who's responsible? How did this happen under your nose?" We all thought Noor was such an innocent girl, but look at her now. The aunt couldn't muster a defense. For someone who once commanded respect and had never been spoken to so bluntly, it was humiliating. Every day brought a new sting of insults and accusations. When she wasn't enduring the judgment of the neighbors, she turned on Noor, slapping her, berating her, demanding answers. "Who is responsible for this? Tell me his name," she'd shout, desperate to fix this disgrace. She wanted to arrange Noor's marriage to the guilty party, no matter who it was, and be rid of the burden that had been heaped upon her. But Noor remained silent. Her lips wouldn't move, her voice wouldn't come. She endured the blows and the accusations, her body trembling under the weight of it all. The aunt's hands grew weary from the constant punishment, but Noor wouldn't give in. Frustrated, the aunt decided she'd keep an even closer eye on her niece. "I'll figure out who it is on my own," she resolved. "Then I'll deal with him myself." From that day on, the aunt began sleeping lightly, waking at the slightest sound. One night, she was roused by the faint creak of a door. Instantly alert, she glanced over at her husband, who was still sound asleep. With slow, deliberate steps, she made her way out of the room. Her eyes widened when she saw Noor moving mechanically, her gaze vacant, heading toward the stairs to the roof. The aunt's curiosity burned. She was sure Noor was sneaking off to meet the one who had ruined her life. This was her chance to catch him, to drag him into the light and demand he take responsibility. Quietly, she followed Noor up to the roof. Years earlier, when Noor was just a little girl, she had lost her parents in a tragic accident. Her aunt, having been married for a decade without any children, had taken Noor into her home. From the beginning, Noor adored her aunt. But her relationship with her uncle was entirely different. She never liked him, not even a little. Something about him had always made her uncomfortable. He was overly affectionate in ways that felt wrong to her. Noor often wanted to tell her aunt about the strange behavior, but her uncle would frighten her into silence. He'd threatened to abandon her in a dark forest full of wild animals or snakes and scorpions. Once, he even bought a fake snake and lizard to scare her further. The fear worked for years. Noor lived under his shadow, too scared to speak up. As the years passed, she began to understand that these were just empty threats, that her uncle would never actually abandon her in the woods. But even though she knew he couldn't carry out his threats, she couldn't bring herself to tell her aunt the truth. The psychological toll took its toll on Noor, slowly chipping away at her sense of self. One day, everything reached a breaking point. The aunt was away, attending a relative's funeral, and her return was delayed longer than expected. Noor was left alone in the house with her uncle. That day, something happened that Noor would never be able to erase from her memory. It was the day her silent fear turned into an unshakable nightmare. The events that followed left Noor questioning everything. What would happen now that the secret was out? Would her aunt believe her? Could she even begin to understand the weight Noor had been carrying all these years? Noor's world was crumbling, and she was drowning in silence, unable to find a voice to scream for help. That day, she decided not to return home. When Noor heard this, she was alarmed. Her uncle, however, smiled devilishly, his eyes gleaming with malice. He left to bring food from outside, as Noor didn't know how to cook anything other than tea. At dinner, he spoke kindly to her, but Noor felt only fear. Her mind raced, wishing desperately that she could flee. Her aunt's decision to leave her alone filled her with resentment. How could she leave her so defenseless? What Noor feared most eventually came to pass. Her uncle violated her, then threatened her into silence. He told her that if she dared to tell her aunt or anyone else, he would do worse. He showed her a video, saying he would release it online if she spoke out. The video showed her being abused, though it only clearly showed her face. "If you tell anyone," he said, "they'll blame you. They'll think you're the bad one. No one will believe you." Noor was shattered. She wept bitterly but remained silent. The threats worked, she felt powerless. Her uncle's manipulation didn't stop there. He kept using that video to blackmail her. He repeated his threats. "Say one word, and everyone will think you're the sinner." Noor, terrified and trapped, endured in silence, unsure how to escape the cycle. She thought often of confiding in her aunt. She imagined confessing everything and hoping for comfort. But every time she considered it, the memory of her uncle's threats held her back. She feared not being believed, even if she did manage to. Darkness. Her husband lay fast asleep in bed. Following the faint noises, she spotted Noor moving mechanically toward the stairs. The aunt's heart raced. Could this be the moment she'd learn the truth? She slipped behind Noor, determined to catch her in the act. Noor climbed the stairs and stepped onto the rooftop. The aunt froze when she saw her niece standing at the edge. Shocked, she realized Noor was about to jump. She rushed forward, grabbing Noor's arm and yanking her back just in time. The aunt slapped her hard across the face. "What are you doing? Don't you know suicide is a grave sin?" she shouted, trembling with rage and fear. "You've already committed one sin, and now you're trying to commit another?" Noor, overwhelmed by her aunt's outburst, broke down in tears. "I didn't commit any sin," she screamed. "I'm not guilty." The aunt, startled by Noor's defiance, stepped back in shock. "If you're innocent, then what is all this? How did it happen?" she demanded. Noor's voice trembled with anger as she replied, "Why don't you ask your husband? He's the one who can tell you what happened." The aunt's face went pale. Her legs felt weak as the weight of Noor's words hit her. She stumbled back into her room and glanced at her sleeping husband. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. This man loves me, she thought. How could he betray me like this? Nor must be lying. She's trying to shift the blame onto him. But a seed of doubt had been planted. She couldn't shake the memory of Noor's tears or her trembling voice. That doubt grew stronger over the next few days. Finally, she confronted her husband. "Tell me the truth," she demanded. "Did you do something to Noor?" He laughed nervously, brushing off her question. "She's just a troubled girl making up stories. Don't let her lies get to you," he said. But the aunt wasn't convinced. That night she stayed awake, listening for any signs. In the middle of the night, she heard muffled voices coming from Noor's room. Quietly, she crept toward the door and peeked inside. Her heart sank. There, in Noor's room, stood her husband. He was threatening Noor, his voice low and menacing. "If you tell your aunt anything, you'll regret it. She'll never believe you over me. I've wrapped her in my love so tightly she'll never see the truth." The aunt's world shattered. She leaned against the doorframe for support, unable to believe what she was hearing. Her husband, the man she had trusted completely, was the source of Noor's pain. Noor, sobbing silently, caught sight of her aunt. The look in her eyes said it all. The husband turned, and when he saw his wife standing there, his face paled. He knew the truth was out. "She's lying," he stammered. "She's trying to turn you against me. You know me." But before he could finish, the aunt slapped him with all her might. "She's a child I raised as my own," she cried. "How could you do this to her? How could you do this to me?" The next day the aunt packed a bag. Taking Noor by the hand, she left her husband and the house behind. She returned to her family home, her heart heavy but resolute. Noor's life had been turned upside down, but her aunt was determined to protect her from any more harm. "My mother didn't have any brothers. This house had been left to my aunt and my mother by my grandparents. After their passing, it had been sitting empty for a long time. Now my aunt had returned and decided to make it her home once again. She vowed never to go back to her husband. She didn't even want to see his face. Though he visited multiple times, pleading with her to come back, she refused. He had completely fallen from her favor. From that point on, my aunt and I stayed in the house together. Her attitude toward me changed. She no longer treated me harshly, but the deep shame and guilt I felt had already taken root. The constant whispers and gossip from the neighbors only made things worse. I felt like I was losing my mind. One day, out of sheer desperation, I took a large number of sleeping pills. By the time my aunt found me, it was nearly too late. She rushed me to the hospital, but the baby I was carrying didn't survive. My life was barely saved. My aunt sat by my hospital bed, crying. She asked me, "Why did you do this?" I broke down and told her that I couldn't face anyone anymore. The cruel words of others had driven me to the edge, and I no longer wanted to live. My aunt was heartbroken by my pain. She understood the torment I was feeling. After that incident, she made a decision. She sold the house and all the property tied to it. Together we moved to a different city, somewhere no one knew us. It was there that we began to rebuild our lives. My aunt encouraged me to let go of the past. With time, I slowly began to move on,